series called Mixed Blessings. This is our Christmas series, our holiday series, and really it's about how the holidays are really a diverse set of experiences for so many of us. There's not just peace and joy, but there's grief, there's anxiety, there's laughter, but there's also chaos. And I'd venture to say that if you were to ask every person in this room how they feel about Christmas, you'd get 40 to 50 different stories, some very different stories. In fact, I'd venture to say that if you were to talk to any one person long enough, that you would hear quite a diversity of different stories within any one journey. And that, friends, is the beauty of community, that we get to be seen and witnessed by one another. We get to experience a diversity of stories. And when I think about our stories, I think about how the more honest we are, the more vulnerable, the more real we are, the better we are able to connect one another. Like, how many of you have ever felt connected to a person when they shared a story like this? Well, I was pretty much well-liked my whole life, and everything I ever tried at, I succeeded at, and all the transitions were fairly smooth, you know? I landed like a butterfly. So, no, that doesn't help connect us to one another. The stories that we connect to are the ones that have wounds and gifts present. And in fact, there is a connection between the wound and the gift. And that's something that I want to explore today. And when we can find that connection, we have approached what I like to call, and what Judith referenced, this idea of integration. And really, this is the idea behind this series, the mixed blessings, is our ability to see life in a larger view, to be able to celebrate the good and the bad, and find really the beauty in all the mixed blessings of life along the way. I heard this week I had heard someone who was talking about journaling, and they were saying that when they journal, it gives them an opportunity to look at their life as a story. And when they do this, they're able to offer some encouragement and some advice to the main character. See, we're all the main characters of our own journeys. And we all have incredibly unique, diverse experiences of life. And yet, there are also some commonalities, some common themes about that spiritual and life journey that we all go through. And I was thinking about what some of these common themes are. I could not help but see these themes come through in the story of our most favorite reindeer of all, Rudolph. And it's in his journey that I see this ever so common 3-stage journey that we often see in life, in nature, in spirituality. It goes by many names. Here are some of the names that we see this 3-stage journey go by: life, death, resurrection. Last year we talked about it in terms of naivete, disillusionment, second naivete. Maybe for those of us who have been on some kind of spiritual evolution journey, it was construction, deconstruction, reconstruction. And today we're going to be talking about this 3-stage journey in terms of the pre-tragic, the tragic, and the post-tragic. Now, what is the pre-tragic stage? Well, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer had a very shiny nose. And if you ever saw it, you would even say, it glows. This is that part of the story before the world gets to you, right? Before the other reindeer come in to make any kind of issue. This is that part of the story before we become self-conscious about how we show up, about our pure expression. And again, this is why children offer such a beautiful insight into presence and joy, because particularly at a young age, children display this sense of self-expression that hasn't yet been shaped and changed and tainted by self-consciousness and the world coming in and saying that you need to change, that you need to adjust who you are in order to fit in. When I was a kid, particularly kind of ages 1 through 6, I was definitely a very attention-seeking child, and during like the holidays, for example, we'd have all our family gathered, and throughout the whole day, I'd say to everyone, like, I have a performance tonight, okay? Like, I'm going to put on a show. It's like an in-demand show. And I was just trying to get everyone riled up and get everyone's attention. But then by the time the evening would roll around, I actually didn't have anything planned whatsoever. But I was just like, yes, I have everyone's attention. And so I'd get up and I'd probably like make up a song, or I'd make up some kind of interpretive dance. It was just all about having everyone's attention. Again, I was like really young, like 3, 4, and 5. And so there was a couple instances where sometimes these shows would end with me trying to take my clothes off. And again, I'm still, as I say it, I'm reflecting on the psychological whatever, but someone would always stop me, if it makes you feel better. But I was just showing up as a child, just showing up as I was, not thinking about how this is being received, obviously not thinking about how this, but I wonder for you, when you reflect on your childhood, when you reflect on earlier stages of life, if you can remember a time, a place in when you were just showing up in that pure form of expression, not wondering how this is being perceived, just being yourself. We so often use that phrase, be yourself, but often that's a journey of coming back to being yourself. What was that for you? Maybe it has to do with your journey in spirituality. See, spiritually, and particularly for those of us who have been on kind of a journey of spiritual evolution, where you begin with a particular version of faith. Maybe you go through some time of questioning it, examining it, and maybe ending up in a new place altogether. But for those of us on that journey, we may also look back to the beginning and remember a time and a place where that earlier stage worked, where our beginning version of faith actually worked for us. I remember some of my earliest memories from growing up in a Christian church, the tradition that I came from, and finding that there was a lot of joy. There was a lot of joy in the events and the community and all of that. And I look back and I have a lot of fond memories, though I know that's not true for all of us. That I know for many of us, maybe from the very beginning, religion is not something that you have any kind of fond memories of. Or maybe in life, you felt from the beginning that you were thrust into this experience of questioning who you were and self-consciousness. But in general, the pre-tragic stage is that stage in life before we second-guess who we are, before we second-guess our expression, before we second-guess whether or not the world is for us or against us. See, we all have that shiny red nose. We all have that light that is uniquely our own. And this journey of life, in so many ways, is a return back to that, back to reclaiming that. And yet this journey is also a mixed blessing, because along the way, we are going to encounter trials. We are going to encounter challenges. We're going to encounter doubts. We are going to encounter a lack of belief in ourselves. And in general, we would call this phase the tragic phase. All of the other reindeer used to laugh and call him names. They never let poor Rudolph join in any reindeer games. Now, unfortunately, as many of us can attest to, we will all reach a point in life where that which makes us unique, that which makes us special, is also becomes to be seen as a problem. That uniqueness actually feels as though it separates us from other people. It's that thing that keeps us from being fully accepted. Our uniqueness becomes a problem because we encounter other people, we encounter systems, maybe even structures of religion that make us feel as though we need to hide our light in order to find acceptance. So when I'm very, very young, I feel free to kind of be whoever I want to be. But when I enter elementary school, I discover that this kid who likes to make up songs and hold command performances does not actually work in kind of a public school environment. So what this actually resulted in was, while all the other kids are playing soccer, which actually is just another word for them all chasing whoever had the ball, wasn't actually like a regulation soccer game. I just wanted to put them down because I'm still salty about it. But while they were playing soccer, I was generally walking among the trees on the outskirts, still making up my own songs, but just by myself. And, I'd walk along, and as I look back now, it was kind of like a rudimentary form of beatboxing that I was just doing by myself. But it was at this point that I began to realize that which made me different, that which at one point I thought had made me special, was not a good thing. It was something that made me feel self-conscious. It was something that made me feel as though I was other than. And so I began to formulate ideas about how I might hide my light. In other words, we feel as though we need to cover our shiny red nose in order to find acceptance in this world. And unfortunately, we've not only had that done to us, but we've probably, whether or not we realized it, been a part of doing that to other people. That we've all been the other reindeer. We've been Rudolph, and we've been the other reindeer. Maybe we even did it with what we would have called at the time good intentions. That earlier clip where we see Rudolph's parents worrying about his red nose, all they're thinking is, well, is this going to cause problems for him? And so in their mind, they had the best of intentions. But in reality, this stage, this tragic stage, is something that we will encounter, that life will bring to us. And it goes by a handful of other names. This stage has been called the loss of innocence. It's been called disillusionment. In the life, death, and resurrection cycle, it's death. It's winter in the seasons. And it's the deconstruction phase. And I look at my own personal journey, and I think about growing up in faith and deconstructing and finding something more expansive and larger after being willing to let the faith that I was given break open. And I find myself grateful for this phase, as difficult as it is. If it weren't for this phase, I know that I wouldn't be where I am today. And it doesn't mean that we would call this phase good, right? It doesn't mean that when we look around and we see people going through some difficulty, going through a dark night of the soul, questioning who they are, doesn't mean that we would call that good. Doesn't mean that we don't grieve with them. But it also holds this recognition that this is an unavoidable stage in our journey. That when we are thrust into the tragic, we can't go backwards. So often we try. But if we do try, we miss out on what's available and what's in store for us if we were to continue forward and we were to find what's on the other side of this stage. Now, friends, right now, I know that there are going to be many of us in this room who find ourselves in a stage like this right now, because it isn't just something that we go through once and then we're done. It's something that we go through cyclically in our lives. And so maybe today you think of yourself as in the tragic stage, the stage of disillusionment, a loss of faith, a loss of security, maybe a loss of belief in oneself. And if nothing else today, friends, I hope you get that is not the end of your story. That by the virtue that there is a stage beyond this, that you'd remember that this is not the end, that there is more, that there is a light yet to be experienced. James Baldwin said this: "It is necessary while in darkness to know that there is a light somewhere, to know that in oneself, waiting to be found, there is a light." Now, when we look at the Christmas story, the story of Jesus' birth, we do see these stages play out as well. Like, think about the nativity scene that many of you have up in your homes right now. Maybe you went more minimalist this year. But think about that scene in your house today, that idyllic, peaceful moment, that peaceful part of the story. But there is a part of the story after the wise men have left, after the cameramen all went home, and there is a part of the story after the peace of the birth scene. And the story goes like this. After the wise men left, a messenger of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Messenger of the Lord said to Joseph, "Get up, take the child and his mother and head to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you it is safe to leave. For Herod understands that Jesus threatens him and all he stands for. He's planning to search for the child and kill him, but you will be safe in Egypt." So Joseph got up in the middle of the night. He bundled up Mary and Jesus, and they left for Egypt. Matthew 2:13-14. Now, what we see in this sequence in the story is that Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, out of fear for political persecution, out of fear for their own safety, for their very survival in their homeland, they leave, they flee, and they become refugees. They become what would have been the equivalent of illegal immigrants. They go to a new land for survival, for safety. Now, in our modern world, we couldn't possibly relate. We couldn't possibly have any kind of example of what it might look like, or if we ask ourselves how we might think about treating those who fled their homeland looking for safety and looking for refuge. We couldn't, particularly in this country, we couldn't possibly relate or have any kind of example. But if we just stick with this story for a moment, you might even be wondering, well, what is the historical accuracy of this story? I mean, there's actually a lot in this account that is even reminiscent of the story of Moses, who similarly fled for his own, or was essentially, protected by entering into Egypt for his own safety. And what's fascinating is, regardless of the exact historical accuracy of this story, of this account, for me, what's most fascinating is when looking at the story of Jesus' birth and his upbringing, that the writers chose these details, that those who were describing the beginnings of this movement that came into the world, a movement of nonviolence, a movement of peace, a movement of a new way of being and interacting with the world, when they're writing the origin story, these are the details that they chose to include. And it goes on. After Herod died, a messenger of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt. Messenger of the Lord says, "You may go home now. Take the child and his mother and go back to the land of Israel. For the people who were trying to take the child's life are now dead." So Joseph got up and took Mary and Jesus and returned to the land of Israel. Soon he learned that Archelaus, Herod's oldest and notoriously brutal son, was ruling Judea. Archelaus might not be any friendlier than Herod had been. Joseph was simply afraid. He had another dream, and in this dream he was warned away from Judea. So Joseph decided to settle up north in a district called Galilee, in a town called Nazareth. Matthew chapter 2:19-23. Now, for many of us who are familiar with the Jesus story, we're probably also familiar with the town of Nazareth. But what we might not be familiar with is the reality that for those who were living in the region of Galilee, there was not a positive connotation towards this town. In fact, the people of Galilee had a phrase, a sort of nickname when it came to Nazareth. And it went something like this: "Nothing good comes out of Nazareth." Nazareth was like one of those towns, when you're on a road trip and you're just kind of driving through endless expanses and you just see like those one exit towns where all there is a gas station, and you're thinking, like, who actually lives in that town? That was what Nazareth was. Maybe you grew up in a town or even a state where the goal of every person in that town was just to get out. Like, that was the highest aspiration. This was Nazareth. And yet, when they write about Jesus, they don't hide this. They don't try to downplay this. They actually own it. They actually make this a central part of who Jesus was. See, we all have shame. Shame about where we come from, shame about maybe our family of origin, shame about how we show up in the world, shame about what we lack. And I think what we see in the Christmas story is that all of that shame has a potential to be transformed. But only if we keep going, only if we stay in and allow these stages to play out. If we allow ourselves to get to the post-tragic stage. Then one foggy Christmas Eve, Santa came to say, "Rudolph, with your nose so bright, won't you guide my sleigh tonight?" Then how the reindeer loved him as they shouted out with glee, "Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer, you'll go down in history." As we reach the resolution of this journey, it's not a reversal of all that came before. It's not wiping away all the pain of the tragic stage. It's not getting rid of that shiny red nose. It's integration. All of it is still there. That which makes you unique, and maybe some of the pain that you've gone through along the way, it all remains. And it makes us who we are. It's part of that larger mixed blessing of how we show up in the world. Leonard Cohen, the musician and the poet, one of his best-known lines is this: "Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything." That's how the light gets in. Friends, your wound and your light, they're not just interconnected. I think in so many ways they're one in the same. That the post-tragic stage is not simply a return to the pre-tragic. It's not a return to that earlier innocence. No, because it contains the wisdom, the empathy that could only have been developed through the difficulty, through the trial, through that self-doubt. And so we all, having gone through these stages, can find ourselves finally, after all, being able to own our red noses. There you go. I heard someone go, "Here we go." Like, here's Jake with his props again. I'm going to regret having said that. The thing is when I look back at my own journey and I look back at some of the rejection that I faced, some of the lack of self-acceptance that I faced, I'm grateful for how it led me, how going through all that added a depth to my own journey. I just want you all to know directly, I'm not the person that's on stage because I'm the most confident person. I've always been the most confident person. I've struggled with self-confidence and belief in myself, I think just as much, if not more, than the average person. But we all go through these journeys. We all learn to own the very things that at times were the most difficult things. The post-tragic is not simply that which comes after. It's not just fixing the problems from before. It's the integration of all that you are. It's the realization that your light shines brighter, not in spite of, but because of all that you have gone through. I like how I'm just trying to be serious right now, but it's like it can only work so well. Robert May is the creator of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and in Chicago in 1939, May worked for Montgomery Ward, who tasked him with coming up with a new Christmas myth. And he knew he wanted it to be about reindeer because his daughter loved reindeer, and he knew that he wanted to have some element of the main character experiencing some kind of self-doubt and some bullying because he himself in his childhood had experienced that type of bullying. And some of the earlier names for this main character were Rollo or Reginald, which I think, Reginald the Red-Nosed Reindeer just doesn't roll off the tongue in the same way. So thankfully, we landed on Rudolph, but he was still searching for that one final piece of the story, the one thing that would tie everything together. What is it about Rudolph that makes him special, but that also causes this entire journey he goes on? And one day he's looking out his window and he's looking at the thick fog that had gathered over Lake Michigan on that day, and it came to him that Rudolph would possess this trait, this light that would cut through the fog, that could be like a lighthouse in the darkness. See, friends, life can be very foggy, right? None of us has all the answers. We don't exactly know what's going on. Life can be very unpredictable. Life can be very chaotic. So that is why we need your light. Your light, having gone through these stages, having gone through this process, having gone through integration of all that came before, the joy, the pain, the letdowns, the surprises, the grief, the hope. When I think about the Christmas story of Jesus' birth and Jesus' upbringing, I know that for, as many of us that are in this room, there's many different experiences around how we relate to the Jesus story. Maybe some of you grew up with this story. You grew up in a Christian tradition, and maybe you're at a stage in your life where you're expanding and you're opening yourself up to that which lies beyond. Or maybe you did not grow up with the Jesus story as the central tradition in your life, and yet maybe you find more meaning than ever in this story. But I'll just share that what is compelling to me, friends, about this story is that it is directly front and center that Jesus, in the birth story, in the Christmas story, that Jesus is an illegal immigrant, that Jesus comes from an unwed mother, that Jesus grew up in a backwater town. It makes all that he stood for, all that he lived for, all that he died for, all that this movement brings into the world, all the more meaningful. The cracks reveal our light. So, Abea, may you shine your light all the more bright, not in spite of, but because of that journey of self-acceptance that you've been on. Would we learn to celebrate the shiny red noses in one another, even if it's not what we're used to? And may we remember that even in dark times, there is always a light, if only we would have the eyes to see it.